which are pictures people have drawn of various kinds of tiny animals that didn't exist, to our knowledge, 400 years ago. And then, for those of you who went to the Dutch history, there was a guy named Leeuwenhoek. I'll show you a picture of him. He invented a microscope. And they said, there's a world out there called little creatures, animalcules. And then over the next 200 years, people started looking at these creatures and drawing them and being amazed. Now, many of you who have taken biology vaguely remember some of these creatures, and I will remind you of them because there's some of the stuff I didn't know myself. I am starting?
Yeah.
Good. Some of the categories that I'll be talking about, I'm going to emphasize. Ooh, I can do this. There. I will emphasize some of these things with little hairs sticking out of them. I'll touch on this briefly, and these guys I will touch on. I probably won't go, well, I'll touch on him near the end. These people are some of the biggest problems. I'm going to give a class someday in a year or two on parasites that infest human beings. I'll talk about worms and ticks and one-celled animals, because that accounts for malaria and African sleeping sickness. And we'll talk about some of that later. I'm going to talk a little bit about this guy here, Dictyostelium. Wonderful names to play with if you get sensual with your mouth. People really liked to be sensual with their mouth in the old days. In the olden days, 200 and 300 years ago, when you had all that flowery Shakespearean language, you enjoyed the feeling of saying fancy schmancy words that it has become of late somewhat of a style to slur and to kind of mumble and to say things like, I ain't gonna go there. You know, I am not going to go there. I'm not going to go much into Plasmodium malaria, but let it be known that these are animals, not bacteria, and I will explain that in a moment. How big are they? Well, it turns out that they range about a little smaller than the speck of dust, halfway between the size of the Earth and the size of the atom. They're little, and they're amazing. And the more you read about them, all I'm going to do is to try to get you interested in all of this. It's too small to be seen with the human eye. But hated by technology, it is possible. So, little people, which I will talk about in a few years, have littler people. And someone once observed big fleas have little fleas upon their back to bite them, and littler fleas have littler fleas. And so ad infinitum. And there's a lot of evidence that the universe is constructed fractally, which means if you've seen fractal mathematics, there's designs like the size of a seashore, the size of a river delta, breaking into more and more forks, which break in branches of a tree, which break into more and more things. The universe has this kind of mixture of randomness and order that is very rich. And animals and life is this way too. But nobody knew this because it's not obvious. And as I mentioned in my stories of the history of medicine, the way you get rid of germs is you wipe your scalpel on your frock coat. There. Clean. No. So there was this guy, we had a class on Dutch history. How many of you went to that? A few of you. And during that time, Anton van Leeuwenhoek was a draper, and he had a hobby, as many of you have hobbies, and several of you have hobbies that may produce something surprising. So he made little glass beads, and he found that little glass beads, the smaller, the higher the curvature of the glass, the more it magnified. So you could really see very small things with this little bead of glass that looked something like this. He showed diagrams that he sent to the English Society of how you make a magnifying glass. He also made telescopes. And he saw little things moving around in the water and the scrapings of his gum. I'm going to freeze this for a minute for an advertisement.
Oh, okay.
So, continuing the size from the range, I didn't realize the range of sizes, because when they drew these pictures, they all drew them the same size. The amoeba was the same size as the malaria. They're not the same size. They range, this is a logarithmic table. They range from the size of a mouse, to the size of an elephant and beyond. Some of them are, if a dog is an average protozoa, some of them are the size of dinosaurs. And some of them are the size of ticks on the dog. It's a very vast range of sizes. They use different microscopes, and these latter two microscopes have expanded since we took biology, what we know about these creatures. To put it this way, if I were the size of North America, one of my organs might be a little mountain range here, maybe my kidney. And on top of my kidney is a little adrenal gland, which might be this whole bay. And in this whole great adrenal gland might be a cell, which is the size of a ship within the bay on the coast of North America. A little ship. And on the dock of the little ship, there is a molecule the size of a kitty compared to a ship. And on this hand of the person next to the kitty, there is a single molecule, which is the size of a marble compared to the ship. And a BB being the size of an atom compared to North America. I'm trying to give you an idea of where the size range is. And the tractor would be a molecular structure such as the mitochondrion, which I'll tell you about more. Protozoa are between a rowboat and something maybe twice as big or 3 times as big, one of these big oil freighters. Very vast range. But they're on the order of a ship in a dock in North America. So they're pretty small. Another way to say it is they're about the size, a third of the size or a fourth of the size of a dust speck. They're larger than a bacteria. They eat bacteria, a lot of them. And again, a logarithmic scale, which each item is 10 times the size. They're about here. Paramecium. They're about 40 to 100 micrograms. Micrometers, not micrograms. They're tiny. And if we were going larger to smaller, just for fun, A credit card is 760 micrometers, and the thickness of a part of your eye is like 500 micrometers, which is a big amoeba, which is kind of a dinosaur, you know, like we saw the Tyrannosaurus Rex. They go around eating things. They're big. We always thought, you know, that's 10 times the size, and they eat little protozoa just for fun because they're mean. And then, but just to put it in line, a single pixel on a monitor is only 340 micrometers. And a dust mite, which has many cells, is like 250 to 300 micrometers. And the point is, most cells are like 5 micrometers, so they can be made up of lots and lots of cells of most organisms. What I'm getting at is that many protozoa are like 5 to 50 times as big as a cell, and they can eat them. So we have mites and dust mites and little things living in our hair follicles that are multicellular animals. Some one-celled animals are bigger than multicellular animals. And the point is, what is a cell? To put you in touch with this again, a human hair is that. This is a software. This is a big old dinosaur amoeba. Here's a little paramecium that they sometimes eat. An egg cell is pretty good size. That's the biggest cell in the human body, is the human egg cell that gets produced. And number 3, I'll show you about, because most cells are smaller than a paramecium. And enlarging that, a paramecium is kind of like twice the size of this whole picture, and little cells are about this size, different kinds. So you're getting an idea of where. And the point, of course, is that everything has a gradient. There's not big things and then little things. There's all kinds of in-between ranges in size. So again, commenting on this, the paramecium can range from 50 to 150 microns, micrometers. And the point of this also is that one-celled animals can expand in size tremendously. I'll make that point, which you can't do. You can get a little pot, but you can't grow to be 5 times your own size. And then when food is not around, you shrink to half your size. Go away.
Sorry, he didn't understand.
You could go out there again and tell them, don't bother us. To give you another size, just getting you on a size range. Here's a hand, here's a mosquito. We enlarge that 10 times. This area, by the way, whoops, 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 whoops. This thing has to heat up. This area is actually only 1/100th of the total area here. But this is a little example of a mosquito, a little grain of salt, there it is, a little cut. These are tiny little bacteria. And this is a small insect. Here's a grain of salt, here's the tip of a mosquito. The protozoa is about light. The protozoa might be from here to here. It's about 3 to 4 cells in length. So it's not shown here, but it might be the size of, say, this little foot is the protozoa. Gives you an idea of where we're going to be talking about. It's about the size of the diameter of a hair, smaller than sand. And here's again relative sizes. The protozoa, the big amoeba that you remember in biology, is much bigger than a lot of these other little guys. So, how do we classify them? Well, in the old days, there were protozoa. But really, the field of classification has expanded tremendously. I'm not going to go into it right now. My job is to turn you on to saying there's a whole world in there. And so it's this area of all the different animals. There are tens of thousands of different species, lots and lots of creatures. And that doesn't count. But the biggest species, by the way, is insects. All kinds of insects. Professor J.B.S. Haldane was asked one day, well, you know about so many things. What can you tell us about the nature of God? And he said, I don't know that I can say that much about God, but I can say that he seems to have an inordinate fondness for beetles. Because he's made so many kinds. And if you ever look through the internet at insects and beetles, you will find a surprising range of colors and sizes and types and numbers and subtypes and sub-subtypes. They're quite numerous. Well, one-celled animals are not as numerous as beetles, but they are quite numerous. And so everything that I tell you about has tens and scores and hundreds of variations. It refers to, this is that size of different, these are the bacteria, the little tiny germs. These eat the germs, and they're smaller than the fungi and the plants and the animals. These numbers are old. Everything has been expanding by significant degrees as we keep doing more DNA analysis and we keep expanding. There are always new animals being found in the forest and in the jungles, and sometimes in the dustbin. So it's a very active field where people are classifying, and how you break it down and how you classify varies. One person who's done some marvelous work within our lifetime, in the 70s mainly, is Lynn Margulis. And she made this point that the cells that we're talking about veer into being animals, and they veer into being plants, and they veer into being fungi, and this is really slime molds, which we'll talk about. They come from bacteria, and they're the base. Remember that they have evolved too. They're not just, okay, we've made one-cell animals, take it from here. No, they keep evolving. You will not be asked this on the exam. Better yet, there will be no exam. But people keep messing with these trees and thinking about how else can we organize it. And again, with DNA analysis, the whole world of taxonomy, classification, keeps changing. Stay tuned. So we found that there's not just animals and plants, but we break it into more and more categories. So for example, the rose in your garden is part of the kingdom of plants, and the phylum and the order, and keeps breaking down. It's a way to organize things. As even the name, some people call them protoctis. Some people call them protists. Some people call them protozoa, although some of them are clearly not more animal than plant. Some of them are more plant than animal, and some of them are more fungi than plant. Don't worry about it. Just know that they're there, And that's part of the fun, is just to know that there is this. It's stay tuned, and your kids will educate you, your grandchildren. But you'll bring it up with them. You'll say, I just heard this talk about one-celled animals. What have you been learning about in biology? And turn them loose, and they get to tell you something. But they know you're interested, and that's very magical. Very magical to have a grandparent who's interested in what you're studying, or who may even intrigue you to go and study it, because they know about it. Anyway, the range, there was one essay on the internet that talked about cells. And the key thing about some cells and some one-celled animals is that there's a few of them that are hundreds of yards big. Some of the forms of what are the weeds that grow in the ocean? Seaweed. Duh. My rememberer is getting weaker and my forgetter is getting stronger. Somebody made that point just today. It's a great line. So it's getting us to really think about cell boundaries, that cells can be of different sizes, that cells are not fixed, but cells can grow in size and shrink in size. This is not the way it is with our skin. When we get real thin, we get wrinkles over the parts that used to be fat. They don't work that way. What is a cell? And the key point is a lot of our assumptions about what is life are called into question when we think about protozoa. When I evolve, I'm going to be a creationist. He's laughing. So, how did it all happen? Well, in my time, my great-grandfather times a trillion, about 1 billion years ago, was a free-floating, large, fleshy bacteria. And there were more and more oxygen-making bacteria. Now, oxygen is terribly toxic. Oxygen burns things, pure oxygen. And oxygen that you don't know how to work with kills much life that doesn't like oxygen. It oxidizes it, it rusts it, it's poison. And a major crisis happened about 1.5 billion years ago when so many creatures had learned how to be plants. And they were pooping oxygen like trees do. But most creatures can't stand oxygen, except that what evolved were a few creatures that ate oxygen. They loved oxygen. But they were kind of weak because they didn't have any protection. They became our mitochondria, little pieces within a cell that runs on oxygen. The idea that came that was revolutionary, and people said with nonsense, I love the history of science, it was nonsense, is they became symbiotic. I'll do this for you if you'll do this for me. You take care of me, and I will take care of you. This was the way life was, that really made for working arrangements. I got distracted because I've been thinking about slavery in Africa in my previous class, and thinking about Passover and slavery. And it's really nice to be a slave. I'll work in the fields if you'll take care of the food. I don't have to worry about the field. To be free, you have to worry about everything. And that's quite a big difference. There's a whole theological point here I won't go into. The point is symbiosis becomes useful, and bacteria learned how to take it in, how to live within one cell, how to play multiple roles, and because of that, they became much more adaptive. This is the fleshy part. How do I get around? Tell you what, you do the rowing, and I go, and I'll protect you. Join me. And then this little guy, oxygen-breathing bacteria, they're killing me, they're eating me, they're destroying me. Take care of me, protect me. Okay, you come in with me, you metabolize oxygen so that I get energy. I don't want to know from the oxygen. You take care of the oxygen, I just get the energy. I'll give you energy, you give me protection. It's a deal. And photosynthetic are kind of, I'll make some, again, I'll use the oxygen and make some, I'll use up the carbon dioxide. And they all got together. These guys didn't get in until plants, but they all got together and made protocysts. Here, an early fleshy germ is eating a little what became mitochondria. And he said, don't eat me, don't dissolve me, I'll work for you. Okay, you work for me, you make energy. And here it again, the symbiosis. People didn't believe this existed in the 1970s, in the olden days. We were born in the olden days, okay? But this idea that, and many people still don't get it, that our cells, our basic cells of our bodies, are mixtures. They come together. And these became the little cilia that we breathe and that help us cough and help us cough up stuff. And the mitochondria come in and they take care of the oxygen. And we are chimeras. Do I pronounce that right? Chimeras. We are mixtures of different creatures. But if we could only, being a psychologist, if we could only understand the collective unconscious of the amoeba. How many attended the class of Meredith? He was talking about the unconscious. Yeah. You know, if we could only understand the unconscious of the amoeba, boy, we don't know how it all began. Anyway, there are some one-celled animals today. This guy lives in the intestines of a termite. Termites who eat wood can't digest wood. What digests the wood? Trichonympha. I will make a home for you, another symbiotic relationship. I will protect you. You digest the wood. Trichonympha can do that. He can take in wood, he can metabolize wood, he can turn out sugars, he can make wood work, and I'll have sugars left over you can absorb. And then termite says, yes. I don't suggest that you eat Trichonympha. They are adapted to the intestines of a termite. But the weird thing about these, that's not the weird thing. The weird thing is these guys are found to be spirochetal bacteria that live and hook on to the outside of the protozoa. They are not part of the protozoa. They have not been internalized, but they hang out with protozoa, like your spouses hang out with you. And they help it move, and they help it live, and they help it be. I don't know what they do. They get along. Symbiosis is the key word for this talk. And they differentiate. We don't have to get all the names of these things. Well, the names are kind of fun. But they keep making new forms. And part of the thing is they keep evolving. I don't know what the germs will be in 1,000 years, but they'll be different. This is another picture of all the different variations of a simple kind of germ. And it's kind of fun to know that they are evolving and they are being different, just like you are all different from each other. So how do they, you studied some of this stuff. I'm just reminding you that a one-celled animal, this is the mitochondria, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. This is that internalized oxygen metabolizing organ. But the key thing is, what we saw as a little bag of empty granules with a little nucleus in it in biology, the electron microscope makes it so much more complicated. And what I want to invite you to enjoy is it's going to get more complicated as we get more and more scanning electron microscopes, all kinds of things are in there. Little bags that have all kinds of enzymes that dissolve other things like food. Various kinds of, it makes bags that scoot out water, bags that take in water. These are capturing messages from the nucleus and the DNA and saying, they're running around saying, what's it like? For example, in a paramecium, which is about 60 microns long, you have a bag that picks up the water that gets assembled and squirts it out every once in a while. Where's the nucleus? This is the oral groove. These things have mouths. They're not much of a mouth, but, you know, they're mouths. Interesting thing, I haven't got the paper, I'm going to find it. There are different subtypes of paramecium, and they don't mate with each other. They mate with certain other subtypes. And there's about 6 of them. 6 sexes to choose from, guys. Wow. And we can't tell. There's another poem that goes, the turtle lives between plated decks, which practically conceal its sex. I think it clever of the turtle in such a fix to be so fertile. And a variation of that is, now here's the happy bounding flea, you cannot tell the he from she. The sexes look alike, you see, but she can tell, and so can he. So they have sex, and they don't have sex with anybody. They have sex with only 1 or 2 of the different types, but they don't have sex with the other types. And we haven't figured out exactly how they tell the difference, because they all look alike to us. This is what they look alike with a scanning electron microscope. Little hairy creatures. They're not hairs. Those are cilia. And they ore the way through the water that way. They have a skin, a pellicle. And they also have little things called trichocysts that kind of, when they eat something, they kind of stab it like a fork, and then they eat it. Very complex things, and we keep discovering more and more about them. This is going to get you warmer to that thing. Crithidia is an example, and they have a little slice I'm going to show you about this size through the Crithidia. It's a bumblebee kind of one-celled animal. We don't know what most of this stuff is. We're making up names. I'm telling you, I am not afflicting you with the vocabulary, except to say, the more you discover, the more you have to make a name for it. What is this doohickey? It's a thingamajig. That doesn't describe it. And every time we have a new invention, we have to come up with 50, 100 new names. That's called jargon. So there's all kinds of things in here, and they're trying to figure out what they do and how they do it. But the thing that's really elegant is the 9 plus 2. Come on. There he is. This is the hair that was sticking out of the cilia. this is the hair. And enlarging it, there's 9 pairs of microfibrils and 2 in the middle. Why? I don't know. There's tons of stuff. A mystery is not a detective mystery. The theologian, philosopher of religion, Houston Smith, said, there's a puzzle. You get a knack to the puzzle. Once you figure out how to do it, okay, that's a puzzle. Then there's a problem. Detective mysteries are subtle problems. He wants to reserve the word mystery for one of those things that the more you find out, the more you realize we don't know. And then you find out another layer. And the more you find out, the more you find out, okay, we know a lot more than we knew then, but it turned out everything has 2 more questions, like why that number and why that design. But there's all these things in the Crithidia that we don't fully understand. For example, the electron microscope has shown us what the surface of, say, the paramecium is, and it's very complex. We know that you have a complex anatomy, but we didn't know how complex the anatomy of the cells of which your complex anatomy is made. And the more we find out about that, the more we find out about everything. And we still don't know. One of my favorite professors said, to live, to learn, to die a fool. So there is a lot going on we don't know about, and it's really a delight to know that any place you look, in space or in cells, above or beyond, or in human relationships, are equally, and I'll talk about that in a year or two, human relationships are equally complicated as cells. Cells are big. Here's a human liver cell. It has, it's as big as this room, okay? And viruses are, this whole big thing is one bacteria. And this is the size, comparative size of viruses. Here again is that cell that I was showing you. The bacterial cell. And somebody drew a picture of what they think the inside of a cell is. The key thing is all these guys are jiggling around and moving around. And all these are molecules, big and little and tiny and combinations, and they're all jiggling around. I think this is kind of fun art. And this is just one of those cilia that one of those flagella that goes out from the cell that we're talking about. So what we're trying to say is it's fractal, and it's big, and it's beautiful. And within every complex cell, you have all these little tiny microbes. So we look at this, and we enlarge it, and we make it. I drew a picture of what's really going on in this picture. Only I've anthropomorphized it. I've made them little tiny pixies and elves, and they're yelling at each other. Have any of you have ever stared at a television screen when you were a kid, at the beads when there was nothing on, just static? It does things to your retina. And I had an insight staring at the little bouncing bees, all that little stuff. And I said, they're pastel colors. They were doing that to my eyes. And then I got this idea that that's what's going on in the cell. I got it later. They're moving around at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they're running around. So just you got to speed this up by about 10,000 times. And they're saying, who's got a D6 phosphatase? I got a, give me an enzyme, like an auctioneer. They're running around, and it's oddly enough organized.
And it works.
And it works. There's no reason why it should work, especially using human consciousness. These are not humans. They're 5,000 times smarter than we are, and dumber. They don't know that they're part of my pancreas. See? Their national anthem is, we're helping Adam be alive. We're helping Adam be alive. Hooray, hooray. They have no idea who Adam is. But I know about them. In the mitochondria, one part of a cell, I was mentioning about oxygen. You don't have to remember this. But the mitochondria is organized in a complex group of little sub-organisms within the organism. This used to be one bacteria that got incorporated into a cell and has been there ever since. Your mitochondria come from your mothers. They don't come from your fathers, they come from your mothers. That's how they do these fancy DNA analysis to say your mother and her mother and her mother, and this finding, somewhere your mother's great was from Asia, and your grandmother was from Northern Europe. The mitochondrial DNA. And they run through the oxygen. I said oxygen burns cells like oxygen rusts iron. But what some cells learn how to do, I mean, this stuff is holy to me. They step down the burning. You know how you step down the electricity so you don't blow up your radio every time you get it because it doesn't come in at 700,000 volts? It stepped down to, what is it, 144, something like that. They step down the oxygen power and they seep out the energy going through chains. And each one of these chains is a little change of enzymes. All these little enzymes, what they're doing is they're leaking out a little bit of energy, a little bit of energy, a little bit of energy. So by the end, you turn it into carbon dioxide. Nobody gets hurt. These guys are smarter than us by a factor of 1,000 and dumber. And they turn into things. It started out as one-celled animals, but the same structures that went on in these protozoa end up being various structures in our body, such as microtubules or the cilia of our nose or of other organs, or the transports within our nerve cells. They account for how we move our one-celled white blood cells around. They take care of us. It started with the protozoa. Dun, da, dun, da, da, and they move around in different ways. The white cells move around more like amoebas. They kind of put it out. Some cells move around and they swim through the water. And some cells go through the water. This is actually the front part of the cell. You'd think it's the back part because it is in the sperm. But in most one-celled animals, they kind of oar through. So they go that direction. And some of them actually crawl on the grains. They actually kind of walk. These are called cirri, C-I-R-R-I, and what they are combinations of cilia. They kind of warn together the cilia to make a one-celled animal. And some of them are big dinosaurs, you know, like you saw in the dinosaur movie. And there's a poor little paramecium, and this big chaos. It's a big old amoeba, and he's sneaking up, and he's grabbing it. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. And here's a dendinium, and he's eating a paramecium as big as he is, and he's eating him like some of these snakes that eat a deer, you know? Just open your mouth and just eats the deer and dissolves these things. I don't know how he does it. Did any of you ever remember the children's song, There Was an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly?
Oh, yeah. I don't know why she swallowed the fly.
I don't know how she swallowed the fly, especially when she just opened her throat and swallowed a goat. So this is 10 micrometers. This is a pretty big size thing. This is a pretty big size. But they eat each other. It's a jungle out there.
Adam, what's the word lysed? L-Y-Z-S.
What?
Notice what's the word lysed. Notice that the cilia are being lysed.
The cilia are being lysed. It means they're being dissolved.
Dissolved.
I mean, even before it gets inside, it's already dissolving you with its enzymes. You don't want to meet one of these things if you're only 40 micrograms in size. On the other hand, he's having a good dinner. You know, we eat things, why can't they? So eating is complex, and these cells are complex, and they'll take it in, phagocytosis, and they dissolve it, they put it in a vacuum, and they mix it with the enzymes. I was talking about the lysosome enzyme, and the enzymes eat it. This happens in your stomach. Well, actually, it happens in your intestines. How do they move? They sneak up on you. And they sneak up, I love this word, inexorably. You're swimming around and you're being snuck up on. Right now, you're being snuck up on, or at least one of your cells, maybe a germ. Did you know that you are actually infected? You're infected by about 40, 50,000 germs right now. But thank goodness you have 100,000 white cells, and they're sneaking up on these little germs, and they're grabbing them. But what's really a miracle is that we have a skin, and it kind of holds still. They kind of improvise their skin, and they improvise the movement, and they make an arm where there wasn't an arm before. And then they make a leg where there wasn't a leg. It was just, and they move forward and they send out. And the weird thing is they consolidate some of their tissues and they dissolve others. Now you don't want to do this at home. They dissolve their own tissues and then they consolidate their own tissues as they move it back, and thus they move. The proper response is wow, which is om, upside down and backwards. Now, even some amoeba, I mean, we were seeing the dinosaur amoeba, but some amoeba are a little bit more timid, and they make a little test. It's not a test exam, it's a name they use for a little covering. And every little subspecies, just like you look all different, they have their own special kind of tests. Some look more smooth, some are more like this. But out of the bottom of it sneaks the little feet, and they creep around. I'm not doing anything. I'm just an innocent little something. And they grab you. So Arcella is one. Here's another one. Difflugia. I love the names. Difflugia. Now again, one of the things with difflugia is that every one of the subspecies makes its own kind of house, and they make it out of different things. This one, you know, like the little sheep, makes it out of wood and out of hay and out of brick. This one makes it out of sand grains and puts it up around it and gets all tight. This one makes it of slightly different grain. This one makes it of a slightly different grain. Different sizes, different things. They know how to pick. This is not my kind of grain. I take finer grain, and I take this kind of grain, more flat and fine. I take pieces of shell. I take pieces of sand. Difflugia. Oh, watch out for these guys. They are terrors. They have a nose of an elephant, and they will pack up like hyenas, and they'll grab onto something, a snail. They'll take on something 20 times their size, like hyenas, and they will all eat it. Terrible. And they have little snakes biting cysts at the edge, so that if I grab you with one, this is really terrible stuff, it paralyzes you because they have toxic cysts that sting you at the edge of these things. They run, and they're brave. They run around and do all kinds of things. The key to this is don't take sides, practice Zen, become non-attached. Know that there are millions of these happening every second, and it's no problem, and it's not your concern, and don't worry about it. God's taking care of it. It's not your place to judge, because if they don't do it, we'd be up to here with too much of everything. This is my grandfather times a trillion. I was one of these guys, and it's one of my symbols. Seriously, I made a very similar symbol to this when I was writing a book on play. But it turns out that there's actually living beings that are made of silicate. They're complex. There are two kinds of tiny animals. There's foraminifera, which I'll talk about, and radiolaria. Radiolaria are made of sand, foraminifera are made of chalk. And they're beautiful. And they're symmetrical. And they, as in this one, as they grow, they make shells within the shells within the shells. This is incredible. I mean, you can meditate on this, on mandalas, which I like, circular diagrams. And you can see, by the way, these are the skeletons. These are the spicules. They're really actually sticky. And there's a lot of mucus around all of these things. So if you're a little bacteria swimming along, whoa, you got stuck. There's a lot of mucus, and they catch a lot of germs, and they eat a lot of germs. And that's probably good, or we'd be up to our ears in germs. So they eat the germs, and then other things eat them. The aesthetics are fantastic. And again, they're fractal, meaning there's big ones and little ones and littler ones and little ones, just like all this stuff. This little design where there's bigger patterns, smaller patterns, that's what I mean by fractal, like a seashore or the branching of a tree. Makes very, very... This is, by the way, these are not real creatures, these are fractal designs. And so you start off with a big design and you make it smaller. And there's different ways you can mathematically create things that look like living creatures. Wow, mathematics. Foraminifera, the White Cliffs of Dover, chalk, calcium carbonate, also known as antacid. If you've got a really bad heartburn, go to the White Cliffs of Dover and chomp a piece of rock. But they're really the ooze that goes and falls to the bottom. They're made of chalk. They build up in layers and layers over millions and millions of years. And I sing songs, as you know, and one of the songs that I sing for the kids is in San Francisco. There lived a whale, and she ate pork chops by the bale, by the barrel, by the ton, by the truckload, by the schooner. She didn't eat pork chops. She ate plankton. And what plankton are little animals, including foraminifera. And she strains them out with baleen, which women then use to make bustles. And that's what she ate. It's very interesting. Jonah was not probably eaten by a whale. whales can't swallow human beings. They have small, well, it's not that small of a pharynx, but maybe this size. They strain it and they lick it off and they swallow really tiny creatures by the bale. You can see the mucus of some of these creatures. So if you were a bacteria, you'd be kind of walking around, whoa, we don't appreciate how much mucus these little guys create. We generally see their skeletons and we say, oh, isn't that sweet? They're sticky, gooey, and that is the way they like it. Just like you. I hope. You're supposed to laugh at that. They create these nets, and there's slight mucus around these that collect germs which become food. Sometimes they act like tiny snails. These are microscopic, and they're beautiful. And this is this is part of the White Cliffs of Dover.
Are these photographs?
I'm sorry?
Are these photographs which you're showing or drawings?
That's a photograph.
Okay. What about the previous two? Are they photographs?
That's a photograph.
Okay.
That's a photograph.
Through
Electron microscope.
the electron microscope. Photograph through?
Yeah, they're making better microscopes than they used to.
Yeah.
Much better.
But you can photograph right through them, right? I mean, that's the way it works.
Sometimes, if you get the right thing. And this is the food chain, by the way. Here's these little kind of diatoms and foraminifera, and they secrete, and that stuff, their poop is eaten by the bacteria, which they then eat the bacteria, and then the slightly larger creatures eat them, and then the smaller fish eat them, and the larger fish eat them. And we think we're at the top of the food chain, but pretty soon we'll be at the bottom. I love this guy. I love to say the word because we all think slime, ick. But what they really are teachers of deep altruism. We're giving ourselves to the bigger world. We're here to help the world be better. And they start off as a solitary stage. And they eat around and they munch around whatever bacteria are at the bottom of the forest floor. And then they start running out of food. And when they start running low on food, they give out a signal that happens to be the major energetic symbol for how things transform in our body and why we can move. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP. They're very sensitive to that. And they sense a gradient of ATP. There's more love here than there is there. I'm going, I'm coming, brains, you know, like zombies. That's zombie humor. Anyway, they gather together and they aggregate. Now the weird thing is, I was saying about cells and boundaries are artificial constructs that we human beings respect for the most part in our bodies, but they don't respect cell boundaries. They dissolve their cell boundaries, they stick together, they become a slug. A little tiny slug, almost the size of the head of a pin. And they start wiggling through the leaves, and they like to wiggle upwards. They wiggle upwards, and when they get to the top of the leaves and the forest underbrush, they start doing this. Now this is the great part. They differentiate. Okay, I'm going to hold the fort. You be the stalk. Okay, I'll be the stalk, you hold the fort. You got it? Okay. And they start doing one of these acrobatic numbers that is absolutely amazing. They start, meanwhile, at the very top, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be the spore. Oh, okay. What do? Make spores. How do you do that? I don't know. But they know. They know that when they're this high near the air, they start getting pregnant. These guys are holding them up. And they get bigger and bigger, and they make spores, and they make babies, tons and tons of babies. And then by that time, they're above the forest floor, and they're waiting for a breeze. Come on, breeze. Give me a breeze. A breeze comes along. Breezes are good that way. And then, whew, and just at that time, they break open like dandelions, and the little spores go spreading all over the forest where there's more food, because some of the dictyostelium cells haven't been to that area, and they land and they break open, and they come out, and it's an amoeba. And the point is, cell boundaries are not what we think they are. I love this, because what if we, the human species, is more like a dictyostelium than we want to admit, and that some of us are going to be the base, and some of us will be the stalk, and some of us will seed the future world. And you know something? Nobody's better than anybody else. We're all needed for that. Just like your lungs and your larynx and your breath and your mouth and your stomach, everything's needed for you to sing a song.
I knew there was one somewhere.
The stalks are pretty big. That's a picture of there's the little base, and there's the stalk, and they're just, come on, breeze. Oh, and I was saying, apoptosis. Apoptosis. Some of these words are fun to do with your mouth. Apoptosis. That's what has explained why you're not totally befuddled. Because as you grow, your brain voluntarily kills itself. Okay, I can't handle this, I'm going. And the other parts of the brain said, we need the room. It's very impersonal. Don't get sentimental. It's pruning. It's pruning what you do in gardens. And your body is doing this all the time. As your bones grow, some of the cells and some of the bones die and new bones get born. Apoptosis, wonderful word. Here's again, just to review it. Starts off with the spores, single cell. They aggregate, they turn into a slug. The slug grows, it becomes a spore case, starts growing. It grows up into a fruiting body. What an interesting animal. Dictyostelium. What did you learn about today, Grandma? I learned about slime mold. Ew. No, slime mold are really cool. Most tiny bugs don't bother you. You have them all around. You have them in your gums. You have them in your stomach. No problem. But some will make you sick. Now, most things that make you sick are germs. Some are viruses. Some are bacteria, which are about 10 times bigger than viruses, or 100 times bigger. And then bigger than that, but still microscopic, are protozoa. Interestingly, most of the ones that make you sick are pretty small. They give you diarrhea, they give you malaria, which I'm not going to go into this lecture. But one I will go into, they're really small. These little swimmy little guys are trypanosomes. These are blood cells, very small. And what I love is here's a mitochondria within a trypanosome. I mean, the complexity within one tiny thing. They call a kind of encephalitis that makes you sleepy. They call it sleeping sickness.
That looks like breakfast cereal.
What?
That looks like breakfast cereal over there. Sure.
Breakfast cereal. I recommend you not eat these. The tsetse fly will do it for you. It will inject the trypanosome. You know, every trypanosome that gets into your body will not make trouble. But since millions get into your body, statistically, some of them can fight the immune system. Some of them do not fight the immune system. But the ones who do can make you pretty sick, and they have babies. What I love are the names. Tintinopsis ventricosa. Say it. Tintinopsis ventricosa. Pleuronema marinum. Pleuronema marinum. Strombidium arenicola. Strombidium arenicola. Notice your mouth as you say this. Saprodinium dentatum. Saprodinium dentatum.
Who gets to name them?
I don't know.
How do they just...
People name things. I mean, this is like naming. Some people who find something get to name it, and people sometimes name some animals after themselves or after their teachers as an honor. You know, I named this new moth after you. Oh, thank you very much. I will be immortal. It's really kind of fun because some of you have named your kids Junior. What is that?
Is that all Latin, the names?
Yeah.
Is it Latin?
Yeah. There are certain conventions, and they generally try to stick it with Latin. So, as we're winding it up, I have no doubt that in reality the future will be vastly more surprising than anything I can imagine. And my own suspicion is the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. And I want to invite you to be aware that in your lifetime, there are things that you didn't even dream of imagining because they were nowhere in the culture. And your great-great-great-great-grandparents never thought that women could ever vote. So don't take things that will teach you stuff. Take things that will stimulate you to learn on your own. And I hope you have been so stimulated. Oh, sex. Of course. We need something edgy to boost our prime time ratings. Any idea? Sex! I'm not even going there. Except, who's the mommy and who's the baby? And there's the fractal again. So, thank you very much for this class.
How can we thank Adam?